Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist. You're going to love this. If you love love, you're going to love this.
Yes, what he said. So how this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. Today's topic is, do you have a faulty picker? And this was something that you've talked about. You said you like to tell guys this thing because it gets them laughing and it gets them engaged when they're choosing people who are completely not right for them. You say you might have a faulty picker.
I say impaired picker.
Impaired picker.
Yeah, which is a kind of a tongue twister, but of course they're thinking pecker and some sort of penile dysfunction thing, but it's but they get the answer pretty quickly. I mean, they figure it out pretty quickly, and so do women.
Yeah.
And it's just a great way to talk about this.
Yeah. And I've personally have an impaired picker.
Still?
Not now, not anymore. I mean,
so you have a history of having had an impaired picker?
Way, kind of. I think I just didn't even have one. I think it was I think it was impaired in the sense of the whole thing we've talked about before. If the girl will be seen in public with me, I will date her. So it's like I wasn't even really picking. I was just...
I hear what you're saying, and I've had a lot of people, male and female, say to me, no, I didn't pick them. They picked me.
Yeah.
But, part of repairing anything in our lives is taking responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm.
And because you weren't a child and your parents didn't pick your bride or your girlfriend for you, you have to say, even if you were the passive person and the other person made the initial overture and they made all the big moves, you still let them in.
Yeah.
So, because I've been in that position as well, and I have to take responsibility for that because I'm still picking, even if I'm the quiet wallflower, just minding my own business on the, over in the corner of the room. If somebody gets in, that's on me.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And before we get into that, if you have a question for Steve, you could visit stephening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so stay tuned for that. And if you enjoy the podcast and it helps you learn some things, share it with your friends and family. So yes, impaired pickers. Now I don't have as much problem with it because I'm from having these conversations and from doing intentional interviews and from also probably knowing myself and knowing more of what I'm actually looking for in a partner, which I had really no idea except for that thing and of somebody being seen in public with me.
Yeah. And she's attractive.
Yeah.
So I find her attractive and wants to hang out. Good. Okay, sure.
Yeah. But I think a lot of this stuff is rooted in neediness.
Oof.
I think part of it.
Such a scary word, isn't it?
It is at first. And then when you do the work to get through it, then it's not as scary. But
no, it's something you've overcome. But boy, it just brings back these memories of a dark time, for me.
Yeah.
For me, it does.
Yeah, for me too. And it wasn't too long ago for me. For you.
Well,
for you, it was ages ago. The old times.
Yeah, back before the revolution.
Uh-huh.
I think there are so many needy people walking around who are letting wrong people in, but it's also true. I think that so many of us would do better if we had been taught better.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like so many of the subjects we're talking about, they really would have been best approached as part of a real, truly holistic sex education. I was listening to someone who was talking to me about my own ideas on sex and sexuality, and he said, well, you see sex as this three-dimensional, kind of thing that's much larger and kind of playing out over a much longer part of the lifespan than most of us who are talking about intercourse. And I think when we talk about the picker, that part of my mind that is picking a potential mate or even just a girlfriend from my time in high school or my time, in my case, in sixth grade, I think that I would have done better if I had known better. And, just recently we did that podcast on the abuse-free life. That wasn't even on my radar. And how can that not be on the radar of a person who grows up with a good education in the United States in the 20th century, in my case, or the 21st century for people who are younger than I? It seems crazy to me that we don't teach this, because even if a young person wasn't really paying attention all that well that day in school, to just have had the conversations, the classroom discussions, to have the lecture, to have the written materials. I think even if they'd made the mistake of getting into an abusive relationship, they would have gotten out of it sooner. They would have recognized their peril earlier, and they would have been free to go on with their life in a much happier direction. But instead, no, we all seem to be getting this message that we need to learn even the basics of a relationship on our own. It's like,
and it's also the abuse is part of being an American. I feel like, that's maybe some people will be upset about that, but that's just the way it seems to be.
You think abuse is as American as apple pie, as the old saying goes?
It's more American than apple pie right now.
Wow. Now that is dark. But, I think abuse, as I understand it and talk about it, which is including emotional abuse and not just physical abuse, is pretty universal around the world. I do think there are cultures scattered around the world that are better at it than we are as a nation. And good for them. And I think, we could learn from them. But, this thing about the picker, that too, to me, is part of a really great sex education, which I think really should be, the name for that should be changed. And I think it should be relationship education or relationship 101. And sexuality would be a part of that. If we're going to talk about anatomy and physiology and how people get pregnant or in how they encounter diseases through sexual intercourse, I think, because sexuality is about, human sexuality at least, is about relationships.
Yeah.
That's the context for our sexuality. We don't just randomly walk into somebody and end up having sex, in the alley. We actually talk, get to know them, exchange names. And those who are utterly failing at this may end up committing sex crimes or living out a life of misery and isolation. But a huge component of this is learning what it is you would be needing from a partner.
Yeah, I got a picker story for the audience that I could tell. So I was in high school, and had my first real girl. I mean, I've had little girlfriend, not I guess they were little too at the time, but it was a real I mean, it's a high school relationship, so
right. A little more serious than
than
grade school.
5th grade, where you just pass a few notes, and then it's you find out that you were broken up with via friend and
those
all those
funny
things. Yeah. So this was a real one, and it's 15, and we dated for, I don't even know how long it was, maybe 6 months or so. And it was good. And then I was in gym class walking or doing the laps we do, they make you do laps in the gym. And if you're not running, they're come on, go, it's just stupid. I never liked it. But anyways, this girl, my girlfriend's friend, she's like, "Oh, are you upset with your girlfriend?" I was like, for whatever reason. She's like, "Well, she cheated on you or something." She just said it. It was one of those ditzy moments of I don't know. I don't know why she said it. Maybe she was saying it to inform me of something. Maybe just it felt like it just slipped out accidentally. So I
Wow.
found out she cheated on me while she went to this place called Zero Gravity, which was like a club in the suburbs of Illinois, the southwest suburbs of Chicago, where you could like club when you're like 15 to
Right.
like 18. It was like an under like a younger club, and maybe older people could have went too, but she ended up doing like ecstasy, and then she
What? As a
cheated on
15-year
me.
old?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. This is how we party in the Midwest. So she did that, and I was like, shit, that's horrible, and it was a horrible thing. And
What was
I
the cheating part again? I mean, she took the ecstasy, she's at a club.
I don't know exactly even the full extent of what exactly happened. I think there was some maybe
Was it just dancing with
some
another guy, or
no,
was
it
it
was like I think there were some fingers involved. I guess that's it's a way that I could
I'm
explain.
sorry, parents. I apologize for that
Yes,
untoward remark. That's a little
but
explicit.
but then I was like, well, and then we like went home together, and I was like smoking cigarettes at the time. That's again,
Totally cool.
totally cool guy.
Yeah.
Um, and then I like didn't even want to talk to her because I was so like just like upset with it all. And then she eventually left, and then I hung out with my friends, and they were supportive and whatnot. And then we eventually broke up. So we broke up, and then I was like, she went off and she would go to like Ireland for the summer. That was like where her family lived. And I
Oh,
would,
well, she was Irish. What did you expect? I mean,
yeah, I
come
should have
on.
known. But then I was like, okay, well, I'm done. That relationship is over. And then she comes back, and we're still like hanging out with the same people. And she wanted to get back in a relationship with me. And I was like, no, like instantly. I'm like, no, I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm like, why would I do that? And then there is this long story that I'm not going to get into, but my friend, I owed him a favor because I did something stupid. And again, it's like I'm 16 at this point, and he's like, your girlfriend wants you, or she wants you to talk to her, blah blah blah. You should call her. You owe me a favor. And I'm like, I don't want to date her. She cheated on me. Why do I want to do that? And he's like, well, you did this thing and you owe me. And I was like, fine. So then I completely just betrayed myself, called her, and then next thing you know, we're dating and
Oh my
and then we
God.
dated for another 4 years, like through high school and college, did a long distance college relationship. And then she,
No fingers involved.
no,
She stayed pure.
she stayed pure, yes. And then yeah, she was, and then yeah, we had like it was a solid relationship. Like she was a good person. Like she just made a mistake, and I was, took her back. And then when I was 21, broke up with me and left, moved overseas to Ireland, and it like devastated me.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, so that's my picker story. So, and I also think back, I'm like, if I, again, I like got sucked into picking because I felt like I owed my friend something. I also,
That in hindsight, do you feel like you still owed him something when
no, I would have been like, no, dude, it's like, I'll take you out to like lunch or something. It's like, I wouldn't, I'm like, I'm not doing it. She did this. And it wasn't like we had a bad relationship, but it was also like, it robbed me of meeting new women, having other dates, the college experience of dating. I didn't do that. I just essentially had a girlfriend that I talked to on the phone all the time,
right?
and then drove back and forth. And again, I don't think it's a bad thing, but maybe like looking back, and also like, and like me, what my body and intuition was saying was like, no, it's like we did it and that's it. And I continued to do it. So I kind of betrayed myself on a few different ways. So that's my,
Well, yeah, and so did your friend betray you. I think it's kind of
yeah.
weird. It'd be different if maybe as a favor to him, you had dated his sister one time, so she, or taken her to the dance, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, and then he asked you, to reciprocate with another favor, or you asked him to reciprocate. I
Yeah.
could see parallel favors like that, but that one that he asked for was really weird. And yet, it kind of worked out for you too, and you realized you learned the lesson that just because somebody makes a mistake when they're 15
Yeah.
doesn't mean Oh, they're irredeemable, they're horrible, which is a valuable lesson.
Yeah, I learned that early on, which is good.
Yeah, so and I feel the same way about adults who are 35, 45,
Hmm.
not just 15, that somebody does something wrong in a relationship, even something seriously wrong, whether they're married or just dating. Um, to me, that's not the deal breaker that it is for a lot of other people. The issue
Hmm.
for me is, are they truly remorseful? Did they apologize? Do I have reason to believe that they were um, in a headspace that they're no longer in because they've learned and done some changing
Yeah,
and growing?
I don't even know if that was I don't even think we had those conversations. It's like we
No,
were so
no, not at
young,
15. No, no
but
way. It just, you were lucky.
yeah.
It just worked out. But I'm thinking about older adults listening to
Hmm.
this who are, well, they did this, and so it's over.
Hmm.
And I think, having that part of your brain that does the picking can be impaired, as we started this whole conversation. But ideally, it's intelligent, it's informed. That part of your brain knows what you need and is able to set boundaries and explain who you are to another human being so that you can mutually agree that you're either well suited for one another or worthy of further investigation or absolutely not well suited for each other. Like if you had asthma and she was a chain smoker,
Hmm.
something like that, then yeah, that's not really going to work.
Yeah.
But most of the time, when I think about having an impaired picker, it's God, it's just so complicated because I'm just pressing ahead out of that ugly neediness.
Hmm.
I'm pressing ahead because I don't know what else to do.
Hmm.
And it's a rather horrible situation I find myself in when I'm doing that. But the way out for those who've had a history of, let's say and I actually know a woman who did this. She married 11 men,
Hmm.
each one, and she knew men were just awful because they were all alcoholics.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, but you were doing the picking because not all men drink like that.
Yeah.
And she really didn't see it. And so, her picker was impaired for sure, but she wasn't taking responsibility for having an impaired picker. Instead, she was blaming everybody else. And instead of looking at herself and figuring out what is it about me that makes those kinds of choices, how did I develop this sort of a pattern? Well, then she robbed herself of, the opportunity to grow past that.
Hmm.
And we all have that opportunity. What are the odds of the next relationship in our lives working out? Well, rather bleak because why? Because of the past. I mean, if the past is the best predictor we have of the future.
Hmm.
And so, unless you really understand the past and why it is the relationships in your past have failed, you're not really equipped to go forward making better choices, attracting a different kind of person, hanging out in the sorts of places where the kind of people you're looking for might congregate. So, for some people I talk to, all of their love affairs began in a club where people were doing a lot of drinking.
Yeah. That's where you meet people now.
That's where you meet
That's where
people.
they are.
And except, no, I've never met people in a club,
Hmm.
and I've never met people hanging out at a bar. I mean, I've met people for sure, but I've never like, oh, she and I could be a real item.
Yeah. You
We
never
need,
rolled up in your fancy clothes and your collar popped
right?
and go up to the yeah.
No, no. I really think, you know, every one of us, if we're going to have a more informed picker, really needs to do that deep dive in what I would call a debriefing of that critical incident, as the police and the firefighters say.
Hmm.
So there's this critical incident that was my ugly romance, my ugly failed romance, whether it was a week long, a month long, or 18 years in my case, and really seriously ask ourselves, what were you thinking when you got in there?
Hmm.
Why did you stay as long as you did? Do you deserve a pat on the back for getting out as quickly as you did? Or do you deserve, further intense debriefing and self, analysis to examine why you stayed so very long. I had to do the latter, and I spent years. I was still dating, I was still falling in love and having sex and all that, but I kept examining my failed first marriage because I really wanted to understand what I had done that was so messed up.
And what
And
was that?
well, and I really knew also that whatever mistakes or problems she might have had, I couldn't blame her for my being there.
Mm.
I really needed to look at myself. And so, for me, it was, of course, starting with neediness, to which I think a real strong dose, maybe a 6-pack of ignorance, and not know.
I like this recipe. A little bit of neediness, a 6-pack of ignorance.
Well, I was just, nobody was explaining anything to me. And it was sort of like, yeah, go do some long division, but nobody knows how to do it. Nobody can teach you how to do it. So you just go do it.
Yeah.
And well, you end up with different symbols than other people, different process, a different algorithm. And that's how we treat building a family or building a love life is, just go out and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible, horrible process of going out and seeing what happens. Because in the meantime, while you're seeing what happens, people not only fall in love, they also sometimes get married. They sometimes have children with the wrong person and spend years of their life in a relationship trying to make it work when there's no hope at all that it's ever going to work. So it makes no sense to do this without a lot of thought and a lot of education. So as I said, neediness plus lots of ignorance. And also in my case, a fair amount of psychopathology. I mean, I was still a very codependent rescuer of damsels in distress. I don't even notice damsels in distress anymore, so I've grown past that one. And I was also a people pleaser, and it was so important for me to be approved of by others rather than to be known and understood by others. So I've let go of needing other people's approval. And I've limited to, I still have some approval from others, but I've accepted that the universe is going to have to always have some people in it who do disapprove of me, and that's normal and that's okay. And I will survive. So my sick need for approval, my people pleasing, my codependency and rescuing behaviors that were truly compulsive in my case, because of my own early childhood trauma, and then all that ignorance and neediness. And it was this big undifferentiated mass of awful, awful stuff. And until we grow up and start sorting that out, it's really impossible to make an informed decision based on rational thinking. I didn't even know emotionally what I needed. For example, I didn't know that I irrationally assumed, because I came from a fairly affectionate family, crazy in a lot of ways, but nevertheless very affectionate. I thought everybody was affectionate. It never occurred to me that there were people out there who don't like hugging and kissing. And that people who might say to me, I love you, might not want to hug and kiss. But I found out, as a matter of fact, the universe makes plenty of those people. So I needed to learn how to discern them and kind of do a catch and release, as the fishermen say, where it's interesting and fun getting to know them, but I also need to, refer them out to someone else who maybe is more compatible with them. And so that's, when I think of having a truly informed picker, it's really about understanding myself. And if I understand myself, then I'm going to do a much better job, especially if I can accept myself as I am, letting women on the secrets about what makes me me. And then they get to have, and I've been on those dates. I was going to say they have a hand in figuring out if I would work for them. But the problem with that is there are lots of needy women who are also carrying around a couple of 6-packs of ignorance. And so even when I was really being honest about a variety of topics like my own sexual appetites, or my need for affection, or my desires for, you know, a certain lifestyle, I would have women look at me who would say, "Well, I could do that."
Yeah.
In that tone of voice that says, no, that wouldn't be her first choice.
Hmm.
But because she's so needy, she'd be willing to settle for that, or,
Hmm.
to kick her game up for that, at least while we're dating.
Yeah.
And so that she could kind of clinch the audition and get the role,
Hmm.
in that epic motion picture that is my life. And we've all been guilty of doing that, trying to present as something more than what we are. And of course, it's a loser's gambit, because life goes on a long time,
Yeah.
and we really don't really enjoy being with somebody who's not the right fit.
Mm.
So, yeah.
With those people, like say the woman who was marrying the alcoholics again and again and again, when you were talking to her, was she able to see that pattern?
Oh,
Like,
because of my brilliant
because of,
intervention and pointing it out?
yeah,
No, no,
oh no.
no, she really couldn't. And, she was older, and,
Hmm.
and in my office with, and I was um, really, I was a counselor and I was younger, but what did I know? She
Hmm.
was the one with life experience. And so she completely disregarded what I had to say. Maybe she thought about it later, but as far as I ever knew, counseling is so much like comedy, in that timing is critical.
Hmm.
And if you're with somebody who's really not ready, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So some of us are really out there looking for answers and open to whatever the universe is bringing us in the way of the delivery system, whether it's a book or a counselor or just meeting the right person. But there are others who are still very tenaciously clinging to their old ways,
Hmm.
because for a variety of reasons, right? Ego being among them,
Yeah.
but fear being another reason, fear of change.
Have you heard of people who they're picking because they think they're picking what they deserve?
Help me understand what you mean, because I think I do, but I
So
want
if
to.
someone's like, well, I drink too, or they're like,
Oh, yeah.
well, you know, I'm picking this person who has some flaws because I have some flaws too,
Yeah,
like that sort of
actually,
thing.
I had a good friend for years, and he was single all those years, but he dated a lot. And one day we were driving around. I remember very clearly the day, even the street we were on and everything about it, because it was such a moment of clarity for me. I think he remembered it, but I don't know if he did. But at the time, it made an impression on him when he said to me, "Well, I have to be open." He was an older man who had already had his own children, and he said, "I have to be open to dating women with children."
Hmm.
And I said, "Why?" And I said, "Why would you have to be open to that?" Well, because I still have kids. His kids were living at home with
Hmm.
him. And I said, "Well, do you want to be with a woman who has who has children?"
Hmm.
And he said, "Well, no." I said, "Then you get to have what you want." I mean, this whole thing about dating is that it's an elective procedure.
Hmm.
It's not required. And I said that because he was a doctor, and it's not a required procedure. It's not like the patient is going to die. This is about enhancing the quality of your life. It's a quality of life issue. Do you want more children in your life? No. Then you don't have to date women who have children, even if you do. And the same is
And was
true.
he like, whoa,
Yeah,
is
really.
it?
For a minute, I mean, it really did blow his mind. I don't know. Honestly, as I look back, I don't think he ever dated women with children after that. So I guess it did
Mhm.
make a big impression on him. But he wasn't a client. He was a close friend, and I think that's again reminds me of that saying: before God created therapists, He created friends. And I think having smart friends who are willing to confront you is a big part of growing up and processing our relationships with our close friends. So, and I've had so many great friends who've shared with me just one liners that made all the difference. I remember another close friend, I was agonizing over breaking up with a woman, and I just felt so guilty about it and
Mm.
just horrible. It was like, I think, one of the first relationships in my adult life after the divorce. And he said, in a very calm way, just looking at me with so much compassion, he said this very simple sentence. He said, "Steve, it's really all right if you change your mind."
Mm.
And I just kind of caved in on myself, and with the relief and also a certain amount of rather wry humor, because it's such an obvious truth, right? But sometimes we all need to be reminded of the obvious truth.
Yeah. How long were you dating her for?
Oh, I would say maybe 6 months or something like that. And part of the my guilt about breaking up was I she was such a great person. She was an absolutely great human being.
Mm.
And I still remember her with a lot of love and respect. It's just that I made a big mistake because I had just gone through a divorce. And the idea of getting into another relationship with a commitment, which is what I had done, unfortunately, was a big mistake, because if you don't want to ever go through another breakup, you need to not make another commitment.
Mm.
And it wasn't like I was commitment phobic, but boy, it was just too soon.
Yeah.
And I had really made a huge mistake there. And so my picker really ultimately is always about me, right? So
Mm.
I'm the one doing the picking on my side. And for the other person, the other person's got their own agenda and their own way of doing things. But for me too, my picker has got to be so aware to see that the other person is faking it, that they don't really love me. My own picker has to realize, yeah, they're really needy too, and they're really
Mm.
willing to make commitments that they're not really prepared to live out, in their life. And so having a pretty sophisticated picker, I think, is really sort of an emotional and relational extension of the old adage, let the buyer beware,
Mm-hmm.
caveat emptor,
Yeah.
and Latin. And I think it's not just what do I want. It's also paying attention to the other person's process.
Mm. And how about, what are your thoughts about when you do start maybe knowing yourself better? Because I like that you said it's about knowing yourself, and that could take you from having an impaired picker to having a improved picker.
Oh,
So
yeah, highly attuned.
once you
Yeah.
do highly attune it, do you feel that those people, like the people you're picking, obviously improve then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm hanging out in for me, it would be a strategy of hanging out in places where people are doing the things I like to do, whether that's having an adventure, say skydiving, or learning how to scuba dive, or going horseback riding and taking horseback riding lessons. Those are all things I really enjoy, I like. And you get to meet the people who like the very activities you like.
Hmm.
And you have automatically a triadic relationship, because there's the two of you, and then there's this third thing you two can talk about comfortably.
Mm.
And it's so easy to have a conversation when you have that third thing. If that third thing is drinking, well, guess what? You're going to have to keep drinking to have that third thing to
Mm.
talk about.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible basis, I think, for a relationship. And the same thing with, oh, the third thing we have to talk about is grocery shopping. I met her in a grocery store. Well, you could meet the next Mrs. Right in a grocery
Yeah.
store.
We just love talking about those deli meats.
Yeah, right.
Like,
It could work out. You could meet the right person literally anywhere. It's just the odds do not favor it.
mm.
So, because I would like to think that for the listener, that the odds would always be in their favor,
Mm.
that they would be hanging out in those places that really make their life pleasurable, whether it's a library or a bookstore or something louder and more frenetic. I think, like a climbing gym. I think that whatever it is you like, you should be doing more of that to build up a life worth living. And you will, as a consequence, be meeting the people who are going to really want to share in your life,
Mhm.
and or at least a high probability of meeting more of them.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned like that doctor, like people having a hard time thinking that they could have what they want. Like, I feel like people don't really believe that. And again, like, is that just more sort of like
Oh gosh.
ignorance?
I
Is
just was
that,
thinking about a friend who confronted me about something. And I at the time I thought he was wrong, and I still do. And I've actually I think he came to believe that he was wrong as well, because it went something like this. I was feeling really great that particular day. I walked into his office and we were just hanging out, having a conversation. We'd known each other for years.
mhm,
And somehow the subject of dating and women came up. He was married, and as it turned out, maybe not so happily.
mhm,
But he asked me what I was looking for, or what I was liking about somebody. I can't remember how we got on this subject, but he looked, after I made some remark, he looked at me kind of funny, and he said, what you want is to be adored. And he kind of
mhm,
made a sour face, as if I had said something really distasteful.
mhm.
And I looked at him and I said, well, yeah, what's wrong with that? Wouldn't we all like to be in a relationship where we're adored? I mean, I have that kind of feeling to give to the right person.
Mhm.
I'm capable of adoration, like as in adoration of the Magi or the Christ child. I can adore a woman in my life, and she can become my goddess, in a sense.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would like to have that returned, because I had previously been in a long-term committed relationship called a marriage, where I was far from adored.
Yeah.
And and I realized, yeah, when he said that word, I hadn't really thought about it, but I used it after that.
Mhm.
And when I said to him, "Don't, what's wrong with that?" And then he looked down and he looked pained as he looked down, and he said, "Well, nothing, I guess." And his coworker who shared
Mhm.
the office with him had always joined in our conversations. And I called out to him and I said, "Is there anything wrong with being adored?"
Mhm.
And the guy looked up and he said, "It's what I want." And it was it was just sort of, again, one of those moments where guys kind of test each other. And
Mhm.
at least I think that particular day, three men ended the conversation with a shared perspective,
Mhm.
that adoration is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
So for
Well,
me,
he came around though?
well,
Oh.
yeah, I mean, he realized he did want that what he was actually doing in his marriage was
Mm.
tolerating a bad situation,
Got it, I see.
and that he wanted it to transform. But, whether he ever actually got there or not, I don't know.
Mhm.
And, um, but I, I do know that in this world, there are men and women capable of that kind of deep, profound love where they just feel grateful to the entire universe for the privilege of sharing company with this other person. And there are those people who do not have that sense of wonder and awe for another human being. And if, for me, in terms of my own picker, yeah, for me, it's a bread and butter issue. It's a foundation issue, that like a sine qua non, without which I'm not getting into a commitment with somebody who can take me or leave me,
Mhm.
somebody who's relatively indifferent, or thinks I'm okay. No, my wife jokes around, because my mother was always an adoring mother,
Mhm.
for whom I could do no wrong, which is not literally true, but mostly true. And when they met, it was like they had a secret conversation or something. There was an
Mhm.
exchange psychically between them, where my wife was graciously allowed to take over the role of president of my fan club. And they joke about that, but
Uh,
it's really true.
yeah.
And for me as a man, it's just been so nurturing, because I feel like I can do anything with this kind of adoration in my life.
Yeah.
And for my wife, I think it's equally rewarding, because she knows I deeply appreciate her, and that she means the world to me. And some of us need that.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I have not had that, and it would be, I mean, I've had it little bit here and there in relationships, but I didn't grow up in a family that way. I mean, my parents loved me, but there were some things that they were unsatisfied with,
Yeah.
like
Well,
specifically career oriented things.
I wonder if your mother today would say, well, of course I adore him. I
Mhm.
don't know that she would, but whatever the background of your story is, the question to me is, do I need that in order to? I personally would rather live alone,
Mhm.
and that's kind of where I
Then not have it.
then not have it. Oh my God, yes,
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had relationships. I mean, when it is like that, and you could and both people are reciprocating it, it's really nice. But then if you're not getting it, it's not fun.
yeah. So that's. I mean, I would agree with what you said,
Hmm.
and then some.
Yeah.
I would say to me, it's a sine qua non now. But I
Hmm.
didn't know that when I was
Yeah.
18, 19, 20 years old and getting married for the first time.
Yeah.
Now I know that, and I'm so comfortable with myself. I would gladly live in the tiniest of tiny apartments by
Hmm.
myself rather than live in a palatial, home with somebody who wasn't that into me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm there too now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe
I.
it's more pervasive. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know how many of us feel this way percentage wise. It's just that once you hear about it, it sounds pretty good.
Well, I still think it's like they don't have the education. They don't know that's even a possibility.
Like it's not they didn't know it was on the menu.
Yeah, and it's like that's not real sort of thing. Like that doesn't exist. I mean, eventually your spouse is going to hate you, or they're going to get upset with you. I don't know. There's resentment's going to build, or I
Yeah,
don't. That's what it seems like. The stories that I've witnessed and been a part of through my life.
I think it's kind of what you said. Um, this picker can become more informed over
Hmm.
time, and quite often only through painful experience. But
Yeah.
yeah, but sometimes I don't think it has to go only that way because I think
Hmm.
again, in a truly comprehensive sex education,
Hmm.
we would all come out of high school with a much clearer idea of who we are and what we need. Because there's nothing wrong with not needing adoration. There
Hmm.
might be lots of people out there, for all I know, who are really comfortable with something more moderated. They just want to share company with someone, but they don't really need to connect that way.
Hmm.
There might be people out there, just as there are people on every continuum, right? Whether it's, I've talked to, I can't abide cigarette smoking, but I've talked to plenty of non-smokers who say, "Oh, sure, no problem. I could live with a smoker. My parents smoked when I grew up, and that doesn't bother me."
Hmm.
And so we're all different. And that's what makes this also very complicated because you have to pay attention not only to what, and not only pay attention, but discover what you need, but also figure out what's going on with this other person
Hmm.
and why, why are they the way they are? What do they need? And can I really live with them as they are? Because unfortunately, a lot of us still have that irrational belief that, well, I can change them.
Yeah.
And no, for the most part, we just are what we are and we stay who we are. We're recognizable. I'm still recognizable to friends who haven't seen me for the last 40 years.
Hmm.
You know, oh, Steve, they still know how I'm going to react and
Yeah.
how I handle things. And it'll be the same, I think, with most people. So, if you're looking for, let's say, a future companion and partner who loves getting into deep spiritual and intellectual conversations, you'd have to find out if the person you're dating is
Yeah.
into that. And if they find those conversations rather annoying and tedious
Yeah.
and boring,
Next.
which would be my first marriage, then yeah, then I'm with the wrong person. I mean, I did everything wrong that I could possibly look back and think of.
Hmm.
And it's not her fault. That's on me.
Yeah. Do you have any top picking tips for people? Like something
Yes. Oh my gosh.
like a list that they could just at least start from?
Oh my gosh.
I
Yeah.
mean, I know like
So
because I really like the idea of that it's about discovering what you need, who you are, and also being aware, like when you're asked as having the intentional interview and talking to the person, learning about them as well.
Well, no matter how old we are, we've all had some bad experiences behind us, and to remember the lessons that you really can't live with this.
Hmm.
Okay, so those all go on my list. But there's certain things I think that,
Like, what are some examples of that?
oh, well, like for me, I just remember one woman I dated who, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, when it comes to neatness and tidiness in the home, I realized I would rate myself at around a 7,
Hmm.
if 10 is the highest. And she was about a 3.
All right.
So for some people, not even a problem.
Hmm.
But for me, that would really be a problem. So, in terms of a picker, and I'm not proud of this, my reaction to this, because I don't think cleanliness is next to godliness. I don't think it's a moral issue. It's more of a, you know, what range of behavior on that particular continuum, what range is within my comfort zone.
Hmm.
And the truth is, I'm not comfortable with somebody who
Yeah.
has a disorganized mess in their house. But it's the same way with so many things. And it's always on a continuum, because I'm never going to meet somebody who's exactly like me on every continuum that makes me me.
Hmm.
And so some of those things are going to be back to what we talked about, I think, a long time ago, universal deal breakers.
Yeah.
If if my picker picks alcoholics over and over again,
Mm.
I need to come to grips with the fact that there's this crazy part of me that's still uninformed
Mm.
and needs to, skew for mental health. I need to start screening people for their drinking and drug habits,
Yeah.
and really be able to talk about that, and to take my time, taking their history and learning who they are and why they use or don't use. It's part of the joy of getting to know somebody, particularly if you haven't signed on the dotted line and you're already married and now you find out she likes cocaine. I mean, that's a horrible thing, right? And if she can't, for me, my picker needs to include, I want an abuse-free life.
Hmm.
And so I need to be with the people who either already live by an abuse free ethic or are willing to commit to that. And it's the same with so many other really important ideas. But some of the smaller ideas that are, I would call death by a thousand cuts, people who are at a different extreme of the continuum than I am on all kinds of things like sexual appetite. If my picker finds this incredibly beautiful woman attractive and I love conversation with her and we are absolutely sexually incompatible,
Mm.
yeah, I need to just accept that like a grown up and move on,
Hmm.
because she's going to be perfect for somebody else,
Yeah.
but not for me.
Mm.
And it's the same way with all these other things that we're talking about. So it's not, I think the conclusion of a conversation like this is that building a successfully intimate relationship is not about luck. It's not about chance. It's about mindfully building something that will stand the test of time. And if you're not doing that intentionally and with a certain degree of both knowledge and reason, then you're missing out. And I don't want to make it sound like it's filling out an application. And to some degree, it might be, but of course, it's still emotional. She's got to be crazy about me, or why would I be with her?
Hmm.
Because I want to be with somebody who's as crazy about me as I am about her, which gets us back to that word adoration.
Mm.
And if she's, a woman who loves me, but she's not really capable of that rather extravagant love that I'm looking for, again, it's sweet, but not right for me,
Yeah.
and I can wish her all the best. And in a similar way, there are all kinds of values, and we don't talk enough about values in our culture. We kind of put a stamp of, if we talk about values, it's usually about family values, which is such an utterly meaningless, empty phrase. But talking about our values and what the things, the principles that we truly value in this world, I think that would also be part of having an informed picker. Because for me, it's one of the things at the top of my list now that I didn't know for sure when I was younger is loyalty. It would definitely be on my top 10, if not my top 5. Because without loyalty, well, let's say she does screw up, right?
Yeah.
And she has an affair or she does something else. That to me is not necessarily a deal breaker. It depends. It depends on the circumstances, the context. Was I in prison for those 5 years, for example? Or was I ignoring her for the last year and a half because I was so preoccupied with my own stuff? I would have to look in the mirror and see, and also see how she's feeling about that. So what looks like a betrayal on her part, I think calls for sometimes, not always, but sometimes a response of loyalty on my part, because I need to stand by people who are important to me, even when they make mistakes. And I need those people in my life as well, because God knows I make plenty of mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also just add, like, trusting your intuition. I think from my story, like that voice inside yourself that maybe tells you, that guides you a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you just
if you don't want to, if you're not possessed of a desire, I would say let it go.
Yeah.
Because again, I can't speak highly enough about emotions here, because I have all these very rational and intelligent people who come to me for therapy, but they tend to ignore their feelings. And feelings, besides calm itself being a feeling that's the basis for rational thinking, it is also the case that your brain is processing so much information so quickly in the unconscious part of your brain, and it serves up that processing with a feeling. And every time you think of touching her, it makes your flesh crawl. Well, you may not be able to explain satisfactorily to anybody why that is the end result of what's going on. But if you feel that way, I would say go with your intuition. I've had a couple of people in my office who said, well, my first 2 marriages were awful, so I decided I would never again marry on the basis of emotion. And so they looked at the next prospect as if they were hiring for a job. And she's got this, and she's got this, and she's got this. It makes perfect sense. And that was the most quickly failed relationship of their lives in both cases. How could it not be?
Yeah.
Because the thing about love and passion and romance is that it carries us through some of the really hard parts of life that would otherwise crush a relationship. And if you, and I'm going to say this to all these women out there who are really uncomfortable with male sexuality, but if you're dating a guy who has very little expressed interest in touching you or kissing you or holding you, you're probably not with the right guy.
Yeah.
That's a problem. It's not because he's such a gentleman.
That's a good place to end. So we'll wrap it up there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. So this week's question is, hi, Steve. This is kind of in line as well a little bit. My husband and I no longer...
You don't choose these for the podcast?
No, they're just randomly sort of selected. So, hi, Steve. My husband and I no longer have a physical relationship.
Ouch.
Sex used to be at least once a week before and during my pregnancy. After the baby, it was less frequent, and now it's been 2 years since we had sex. He refuses to admit he's no longer attracted to me and says he's simply not interested. We've been to counseling, but it didn't help. Am I supposed to give up the idea of ever having sex again? Is this enough to leave him over?
Wow. Well, I laughed because I found the prospect of, as she described it, so uncomfortable. And so it was a bit of a hysteric laugh on my part. But the truth is, it's just so utterly sad. And I just extend the most heartfelt compassion to her and all the others out there listening to this who are with someone who has no problem at all staying away from them. I think that's a pretty lonely and awful place to be.
Mhm.
unless it's by mutual intention. I think there are these wonderful people out there who are asexual, and for them, the perfect sex number is 0.
Yeah.
And so they can have a great life together, sharing their company and the rest of their lives. But for those of us who are sexual, I would say, yeah. Well, let me start with an anecdote. So it's sort of a long answer to her very direct question. I was dating a woman who asked me what I liked about dating another woman I had dated the year before.
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh, she was just wonderfully generous in terms of, her ability to give love and gifts, and even in the bedroom, she's just a very generous person." And she sneered at me and over a plate of spaghetti and said in a disdainful tone, "Sex sure is important to you,
Mhm.
isn't it? Or your sex life sure is important to you." And I said, after thinking about it, I said, "Well, yeah, my sex life is important to me. Isn't it important to you?" And then again, she looked down and there was a long 30-second wait. And she said in this little girl voice, "Yes." And, before we get married, most of us, the vast majority of us, would say, "Well, of course I want a sex life and I want it within what I consider normal, range." And then to find out your partner, for whatever reason, doesn't want to ever touch you again.
Mm.
How awful is that? And so I can't tell the writer of this question what she should do because there are too many variables going on. But I know that for me, there is no age at which I would be too old to divorce over a failure to exchange physical affection.
Mm.
I don't care if I'm 90. Right now, I'm 70. And of course, it's a part of my daily life, exchanging physical affection with my wife.
Mhm.
And I can't even imagine it being otherwise.
Yeah.
Now, barring, serious health complications or momentary and fleeting emotional problems like the death of a beloved member of the family, like a parent, or even I can say most recently a dog. My dog died recently, and that really affected my wife a great deal.
Mhm.
And if she had not felt comfortable having sex during that time, I would have understood. But so there are those circumstances, I suppose, that would come along. But by and large, we all know what our magic sex number is. We know about how often we would like to have a heartfelt kiss and an embrace from somebody we're in love with. We have some sense of that. And if you're not getting those needs met, and I do think they are needs, then those not getting your needs met is going to affect you negatively. And you're going to become someone you don't like, whose life you would never normally choose. So you have to decide, is that worth sticking around for so that you don't have to go through a divorce? For me, again, I'd give up the house and gladly take a studio apartment, not to live with somebody who is that indifferent to me.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for that question. And thanks, Steve, as always. And thank you all for listening. We will see you all next week. Goodbye.